As always, our show is sponsored by Memoria Press. You can find our curriculum at memoriapress.com.
Welcome to Classical Etc., a show from Memoria Press that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. Seated with Martin, who decided to sit at my right hand. I don't know if
because he wants everybody to know that he was here first.
Yeah. He was here first. To my left is Tanya and Paul. And the topic of our conversation today is what makes a great book great, which is one of those fun conversations that there are truer and falser answers to the question, but there's a lot of different ways to come at it. And so we're going to get into those ways. But before we do that, Martin, did you read anything fun over Christmas break?
What did I read over Christmas break? I know I read something, but actually I saw a great movie.
You did?
Great Christmas movie, which was Remember the Night with Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck.
Preston Sturges.
Yes, the director, Preston Sturges. And I try to watch like one new old Christmas movie every Christmas. And this was the one I watched this time. And there really are so many great Christmas movies that you really, some of which you haven't heard of. So I just really, this great story of redemption, just a great Christmas theme. And in a sense, and hopefully we'll talk about this maybe on some Christmas show, but about this idea of redemption and seeing what Christmas is really about, sort of like Christmas Carol does.
Sure. So keep that in the holster 50 weeks from now.
I'm going to
come back to it.
And I'll talk about it again.
So Martin, actually, I wanted to tell you what I read over the break, which was The Old Man and the Sea.
Yes.
By Ernest Hemingway. And I wanted to tell you about it because I imagine when I'm your age, when I get out
but then this is the old man title.
When I get out up in the morning and I don't have any motivation, I'll probably read that book to like make me want to write another article and I kind of could see you doing that.
You think so?
You're flagging a little bit in stamina or energy, and you're like, I need to read Old Man
I was
of the
just
Sea.
bragging about how I don't get sick like all you young people, and you're telling me.
Tanya, what'd you read over the break?
I read a British murder mystery by Peter Lovesey. He sets his books in Bath, and I just love his detective character. I'm sure nobody's ever heard of him, and I'm rereading for I don't know how many times Pride and Prejudice because to get ready for our little 2 days with Lita coming in to talk about that book. And I'm just thoroughly enjoying it every time. Mm-hmm. Talk about what makes a great book. It's like, it's a book that you can read over and over and over, and it just never grows old. Kind of like my husband listens to Let It Be every single time it comes on the radio, which he's been doing for 40 years now?
Sure.
And it never gets old, he says.
That's great. Paul, what about you?
I'm impressed that you all had time to read at Christmas. I was trying to keep animals alive in the frigid cold, and then I had family.
Discipline first thing in the morning.
Tell you what, I was getting up and going and trying to make sure that everybody was still alive. But because Martin brought up movies, I was gonna say I convinced my whole family to watch The Muppets Christmas Carol. And my recommendation, when you were asking in that episode about, interpretations that we'd seen of the Christmas Carol, and that was the only one I'd watched, and it was good. After having just read the book and then going to watch it, I was disappointed in a few spots.
Oh, okay. Really?
Yeah. That scene that I just loved in the book about where Scrooge sees his nephew, and they're all joking about him, but it is lighthearted. You could, by reading it, you could still see that Scrooge was welcomed,
right?
Even if they were joking about him, but it does not come across that way in the Christmas Carol, and so in the Muppets version. So there were some things like that I was like, bummer.
It's like that in any movie
except The Princess Bride.
haven't.
I also watched that one over Christmas. It's phenomenal.
Have you
Love
read
it.
the book?
I have.
And the movie doesn't disappoint?
No, it is as identical can
Really?
be between the two.
I've never read the book or seen the movie.
Me
I think
neither.
I may be, okay.
You've never? Oh.
Never. So you really like
I
it?
just because we talked about it on some previous show, I think. So I recorded it, and I'm going to watch it.
Are you gonna
But I wanted
watch
to
it?
watch it with my wife.
Recorded
See, I'm
on
thinking, probably. I'm thinking
Next
I'm
thing you know,
going to
he'll be
read it.
criticizing my 8-track tapes.
Why are you going to watch it instead of reading it?
Princess Bride.
Yes.
Well, I didn't know that it was so close to the book.
Mm.
I had heard the movie. The movie is what I hear about because most people have not read the book.
That's right.
So I didn't know how good the book was. He's saying that.
I'll lend it to you if you like.
I have a copy of that as well.
Oh.
I just think you should read it before you watch the movie.
Is that what you did?
I haven't done either yet, but
Well,
yes,
then why
that
are
is
you
what,
telling me?
Because that's what I'm going to do. And I just always
She said it so
think,
authoritatively, and I thought there was some authority behind
Well,
it, but
that's
it turns out
because-
there's not.
We're book people. And that's the topic of our conversation.
yeah, that's
And we
right,
keep-
not
we keep-
movies.
We keep wrestling it over to movies.
Yeah, but I'm going to bring it back to books.
Please bring it back to books.
Memoria Press invites your students to enter a world of truth and beauty found within the brushstrokes and handiwork of the great artists of the Western world. Join Kyle Yonke as he unlocks the works of more than 5,000 years of art history to explore how a classical history of art lays a foundation for the great artists of our future. A Classical History of Art, available now from Memoria Press.
So part of our mission at Memoria Press is to impart an education that gives students exposure to the great conversation. And that great conversation is most often found in great books. And so we also are choosing great books, not, our students aren't reading 50 average books in their class. They're usually reading 3 or 4 great books. And this is preparing them for a life of reading great books. But to really do that well, people have to know what is a great book. And we're using this very, subjective adjective, great.
Mm.
What makes a great book great, Martin?
Well, let's see. I think for one thing, a great book. I'm just gonna throw out one thing because I'll think of more as we further the discussion. I think one of the chief criteria for a great book is that it deals with some universal issue, something that every human being, and no matter what circumstance they're in, that it's relevant to them. So I'll just throw that one out as the first of the criteria.
Name some of the universal themes that come to mind that as you've been reading a book, you've seen that book kind of start to illustrate this universal theme or discuss it in a way you hadn't seen before. And that made you think this is a great book.
Well, I'll of course take a big picture of this. So, for example, in Greek literature, and I think that different cultures in the Western tradition have emphasized different universal themes. So, for the Greeks, if you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, the two things you see sort of stressed are strength and intelligence. Particularly in the Iliad, where Achilles, the hero, it's strength is really the theme there. Whereas in the Odyssey with Odysseus of many wiles, he defeats his enemies not through strength in battle, but through intelligence. He outsmarts his enemies. So those are the two great ideals in Greek culture. You see those embodied in those books. In Roman literature, what you see is order and piety. Those are the two Roman virtues, we could say. And so those are the two themes they stress. Order in society, they ran the world for 1,000 years in a way that the Greeks never could because they didn't have that. That wasn't the emphasis with the Greeks. And then piety, which is the order of the soul. And you see that in the whole Roman attitude toward family and practical virtue. The Roman philosophers, Stoicism was quite popular then. what you do in an everyday situation, not some theoretical what is the good, but what is it to be good right here and now. So for them it was order and piety, and then for Christianity it was reason and faith, I think, were the two great virtues. And so you see those in a lot of the great works in the Christian West.
Tanya, same question to you. What makes a great book great?
Well, I totally agree with Martin. I think universality has to be the main thing. And I've noticed just in my rereading of Pride and Prejudice, her characters are so real and they are so consistent throughout the entire book. And so I think besides just theme, there are other things like characters, and there are so many themes that start when when kids are reading picture books, Pride Before a Fall, and my mind is blank. I have a list of them.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to read them all.
The list of things
but
that
I mean,
you think
there
make
are
a great
servant
book.
leadership. No, this
Literary
is just a
themes
list of, yes. I mean, there's so greed, friendship, community. They're all through literature that I think that has to be part of it. For me, and this is just me, this is only what I need in a book to make it a great book for me. I need redemption.
That was your issue with Wuthering Heights.
My issue with Wuthering Heights and my issue with The Great Gatsby. I just don't see any characters with redemption in either of those books.
Do you think there's
You like Wuthering Heights?
I do like Wuthering Heights, but I also do think there's redemption. And that's what my question to you is, to maybe say it's not just you. Is there a case to be made that non-redemptive stories don't fully reveal, illustrate the human condition?
Yes, I do believe that's true. That's why I think it's just a personal issue that I have, that I need redemption. I need to experience redemption in the books that I read. But I absolutely think that not having redemption also teaches.
Yeah, I think there's a case to be made, though, that a book is better that includes themes of redemption.
I agree.
Because it's more true to our
that's
human
an innate
experience.
human need.
Yeah.
And therefore universal.
So we need to talk about Wuthering Heights and how you see redemption.
I
When
think we've
don't
talked about
at
that on the
some
podcast
point.
before, haven't we?
I don't think we've actually.
Now, redemption is a universal theme, but it's not the only universal theme.
No, it's not.
You
But
do
it's
have
just
tragedy where the high are brought low.
That's right.
so-
But even then, I feel like you see redemption somewhere. Usually when the high are brought low, there is some character then who was low that is raised up.
Mhm.
There's this juxtaposition.
Or that is given a future opportunity where there could be that kind of redemption.
Which is, again, this is good versus evil, right? This is Star Wars and
Well, and
what else?
And
I mean, everything.
There are these universal themes, and one of them is justice.
Justice,
and
absolutely.
to each his due. So to the good, and to the evil. So,
Right.
So not everybody's redeemed in a just story. Right?
But don't you think, too, that the characters have to be universal, too? They have to be people that we can still relate to now?
I don't think every character has to be, you don't have to be able to sort of fully identify with them, but there has to be some aspect of them. And if you're dealing with a universal theme, that character is going to have some sort of universal aspect, whether it's Hector and his love for his wife, right? Or something that could make you go, well, I can never put myself in Hector's shoes because I've never been in a military, situation. I'm not, I'm not a prince of a family whose, brother went and, stole another guy's wife. Like let's, but I can identify with him because he's got that wife and child that he's leaving for some higher purpose.
Well, and we can even identify with characters that aren't heroic like Hector. We can identify with them too and with their weaknesses. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have characters who have mostly negative attributes or all negative attributes at all. But I do think the characterization has to be based on what we know of humanity in order to work.
Or otherwise, the character just doesn't work.
Right.
Which leads to maybe my question to both of you, as you've both gone towards universality, universal themes, the universality of characters as central to the answer of the question, what makes a great book great? The counter would be, there are certain documents, say the Federalist Papers, that are deep, thorough discussions of universal themes like freedom. Mm-hmm. But I think King Lear, the play, is a greater book than the Federalist Papers. Is there anything in addition to universality that a book needs to be great? Or could I just this afternoon write an essay on friendship and it'd be a great book?
Well, there you're going into why, what, rather than just a great book, but why does fiction work so well to do things that the Federalist Papers on a dry reading would not do?
Right.
Well, but to your point, that's the question: is in the definition of great books, are we talking about does the term great books innately require that it be fiction, or because I think you would, and Martin, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think if you are including nonfiction there, we're talking about the great ideas more than the great books, and the great books would tend to be more fiction.
Well, I would also say that a great book has to have both truth and meaning. And prose writing is better fitted to communicate truth, whereas fictional writing, a story, is better at showing you the meaning of something. That's what a story does.
And I think, too, and this may be a bad example, but I think Augustine's City of God is very difficult to read. And there, he has that just war theme in there. And I think if we get to the point where we can read that, it is absolutely going to be edifying to us. But I think for young students and for people not ready to read Augustine, the Iliad teaches the same, it brings up the same question: is this a just war? And so I think fiction can do what the great ideas. I mean, maybe that has to be part of it. Is not just universality, but does a book to be great have to include the great ideas?
Yeah, perhaps. But wouldn't you say that the City of God is a great book?
I absolutely would. Yes.
So therefore, it doesn't have to be fiction.
Correct.
Right. I think I'm the one that.
So are the Federalist Papers a great book?
I haven't read them exhaustively.
Or maybe we say that they're not. The fact that they're not fiction doesn't automatically disqualify them.
Right. As we answer this question.
And yet you could say, I don't know, what was the fiction book that you put next to it in Federalist Papers?
King Lear.
And King Lear, maybe you could say that King Lear is a greater book because it has more meaning, according to Martin, but you could still put the Federalist Papers in the pile of great books.
And you could ask what makes City of God a great book. Part of it is its historical importance, right? Because of its development of the idea of just war theory from a Christian worldview, because of its documentation of the fall of the Roman Empire from a Christian perspective. These are things, its historical importance seems to be a part of its greatness, right?
Yeah, I think so. Its relevance, do you mean its relevance to its time?
Its relevance to this time because of its relevance to that time.
Right.
Well, but you're also getting to its persistence, right? So it could be historically important because of the effect it had at that time, but not actually persist to this day because it's not universal, right?
Which means,
but that universality should make it persist, and it's something where people go back over the centuries and read it again and again and again.
And this is a harder row to hoe for prose, actually, than fiction, because I think fiction. It's dealing with these fundamental situations which are always with us. And not that the Federalist Papers, for example, isn't relevant. I think it's really relevant right now because people are forgetting what a republic is and think that we live in a pure democracy of some kind.
But are they relevant in countries other than America?
I think that's what Aristotle would argue.
I mean, in the context of political discourse, sure.
So it's a good question. I think to restate Tanya's question is, were the Federalist Papers written in such a way that they commented on universal themes well enough that someone who has nothing to do with the political system of America should read them?
Well, but
Are they that great of a book?
But some great books, you need the historical background to understand what's going on, right? So to ask the question about the Federalist Papers in saying somebody who knows nothing about American history, would it speak to them? No, like, because, if you don't know Napoleonic era Russia, War and Peace is going to mean very little to you, right? And so I don't think your question is fair, but I think the question of, given a knowledge of the historical context, somebody completely removed from that historical context, given that they know it, would there still be universal themes in the Federalist Papers? That's worth discussing.
But would a book be greater if knowledge of the historical context is less important? So, for instance, limited historical context is necessary to read the Iliad or the Odyssey because a lot of it is fictional, correct? And so, but it's still a great book.
I agree with that.
And that speaks to its universality.
I don't know. I think there's assumptions about, because we have to do a lot of training to get kids ready to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? So they're not going into it without, and we recommend this for adults too. You don't go into it without already knowing the background storyline and already knowing the historical context and the culture, right? Because you've got gods and goddesses flying all over the place, making decisions that if you don't know Greek mythology, you're shot.
Well, and you also have to think about who there's books that sort of telescope things down because they're trying to reach a particular audience, right? Whereas other books don't. I don't think the Iliad and the Odyssey do that. They're speaking, intentionally more broadly. But yeah, there are still themes about a good government and the common good and that sort of thing in the Federalist Papers. But it's being written to farmers in upstate New York, trying to convince them that this is how we should structure our government. So it does have some particularity there, but it still has universal themes in it.
So Paul, Tanya, go ahead.
So back to Paul's point, I do think that the reading of the Iliad is definitely a richer, more meaningful read once we've done the hard work of prepping students. But I also think you can read things and not have that background and still enjoy the story. You're just not going to get what you could get out of it. So I think that even if you're not prepared to read a great book or a good book, a book worthy of reading, that it's still worth reading. The reason I say this is because I also started Orthodoxy. I am struggling with that book. There are so many references to things I don't understand, to people I have no idea who they are, that I am really struggling. And I'm thinking, is it worth reading? Because everybody says it is.
Well, definitely don't read heretics.
Struggling with it.
But that's a good point, right?
But I'm still going to get some things out of it, just not what I would if I were really prepared to read it.
And people could end up in paralysis thinking, well, I can't read that until I've done all this other stuff, and I can't read that because I've got to read all this other stuff. And no, it is worth reading, but I was just challenging the assertion of being sort of completely historically unaware.
Yeah, that was a good point to bring up. Is because the things we're talking about, the books we're talking about, are difficult.
Well, and again, I think this is more of a problem with prose. Is that your problem that you're having with orthodoxy. Because Chesterton's a journalist. He's writing to everyday people about everyday things. But what makes it great, what makes a book like Orthodoxy great, is that it relates time to eternity. But he is speaking to a particular time.
Yes.
That's very evident.
It is. And I think, what should I do to prepare myself to be able to read it? Because I feel like I'm halfway wasting my time.
I mean, it's harder in a story to just address something, so narrowly from universal ideal. Stories tend to worry, but in prose, that's more of a problem. You do have things that are time bound in some way, and yet
Right.
they are bringing those eternal values and eternal themes into the situation.
So, Paul, we've answered the question talking about the universality of themes that great books possess, the universal characters that they usually contain. Whether fiction or nonfiction, they address universal themes. Oftentimes, we think of historically important and persistent books as great. I haven't asked you directly yet the question, what makes a great book great? Anything else you want to add?
Only took us 30 minutes to get to me. I think so. I was listening to a show and they were talking about kids and kind of their experience with their kids. And one of the guys made a comment and he was quoting somebody else. And I felt that, I mean, and we say this sometimes, but he said, the idea of raising kids is that's kind of the wrong phraseology. We should be saying we're raising adults. And so in the context of the great books, I was thinking about this, like a book to be great, I think needs to be inviting us. I think, I want to say it's going to be something that an adult would appreciate. So, but it makes me think about like Make Way for Ducklings or The Little House, right? I love The Little House. It's a great book. It's a phenomenal book.
And it has the universal theme.
It absolutely has a universal theme in it.
It leads you straight to Anna Karenina.
It did lead me straight to Anna Karenina. But but it's written to a child, but it has that appeal to an adult. So that goes back to that universality, but I think there are probably, and I haven't come up with some, but just thinking about books that may deal with some universal themes. I don't want to bring that book up, but is not pushing the reader towards their full human potential and is calling them to be that mature person, if that makes sense. So,
like books of entertainment.
Books of entertainment.
That entertain you.
And maybe there is some issues of justice in there, right? But the major thrust of that book is entertainment, right? And so just because you can pull up something, say the Hunger Games, right? And say they're dealing with injustice, right? There's this, tyrannical government that's making kids fight each other to the death, right? And so this is rebellion against injustice. Yeah, but it's not written in a way that invites us to contemplate truth, right? Talking about truth and meaning, right? So that's where I think there is, and it's sort of, for me, is very intangible. And I've kind of been thinking about this for 30 minutes. You waited to ask me the question. How do we quantify that, or how do we characterize it? I don't know.
I think what you're talking about is kind of the last piece that I had been thinking about, we hadn't talked about, and that is quality.
Yes.
A book has to actually be good to be great.
I wrote
it has
down
to do
elevated language.
It has to do something great and to do it greatly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are good things to do, and there are good ways to do them, and those kind of have to go together.
But we also recognize that there is sort of an ideal, or there's an elevation that we have to conform ourselves to, right? So I tried, and so I told Shane this the other day. I was looking for a book to listen to while I was out and about doing stuff. And I decided, you know what? Shane's been reading The Beautiful and the Damned. I'm going to try it.
Which is
Fitzgerald. Yeah. And so and Shane has said this multiple times on this podcast. He's got this rewind rule that if he doesn't get it, he goes back to it. And I start listening to this. And the first 30 minutes, like, I'm engaged. Next 30 minutes, something happens. I'm not fully engaged. And I said, you know what? I'm not going back. I'm going to break Shane's rule. I'm going to keep going.
So foolish, Paul.
See if I can get back on track. And I went about another hour and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. Absolutely no idea. But in that, I thought, this doesn't mean it's not a great book, because I got to go back and start from the beginning again.
That's right.
I don't have a natural affinity to understand concepts in the way Fitzgerald puts them, right? But it is worth me sitting there again and trying to understand it because there's probably something worthwhile there.
Well, like I don't really enjoy Hemingway, but he is a beautiful writer. I just don't really relate to his characters well. Everything seems kind of dark to me, but he is a beautiful writer. And I've said before, I'm not a big Tolkien fan, but you talk about mastery of the sentence. It's just worth reading for that. And I think that's got to be a part of it.
Yeah. What other literary elements aside from prose and mastery of words and elocution? And then you've also mentioned characters. What other elements make the great books? I'm thinking, plot. What are the other things that, in terms of the structure of great books, can potentially make them great?
Well, of course, again, it's going to differ in prose and it's going to differ in fiction. In fiction, there are elements in a fictional story that you have to have right, and we know what those are. Plot, character,
setting,
theme, style. I mean, those are pretty much set, and you can judge any good work, narrative work, using those. And I think that, to me, as somebody who writes prose, I don't understand how a person writes a story and does it so compellingly. But people who have that gift, and there's some people who are not thinking about plot and character and setting. They just write a story. They're just storytellers. They're natural storytellers. And I think the best writers of fiction are storytellers. And that story, whatever they're thinking about, great ideas and universal meanings, if it's a good story, I've been thinking a lot about this lately, that we always look for something other than a good story, as if a good story is not in and of itself enough. And I think there's something about the narrative structure and what it confers upon the things it's talking about that, again, is what gives it meaning. So was why fiction is the thing most appropriate to meaning giving. Some people just, I think that's more prose. I think you can learn to do well, even if you're not a natural, but storytelling is, I think, much harder to do if you don't have the natural gift for it.
And I think that's the key. I do think I think it is a muse, just like being an artist or a composer or a gifted musician. I just think people are gifted writers, and that is a God-given gift. I do think people can learn to write, but I think there are writers who are gifted. And there's no way that I could sit beside them and produce what they produce, because I don't have that gift in the same way I couldn't play. I played piano for 3 years and it was just a total failure. And my mother was finally like, okay, I'm going to
stop.
Let's put us all out of our misery here. I mean, it wasn't going to happen.
So let me put you all on the spot, as I always do. And let's end by thinking about our curriculum and the books that we've chosen for the Memoria Press Literature Sequence. To lesser and greater degrees, they are all great books. Is there one particular book in our sequence that you can think about that you would say is great, and tell me why? And let me start. I'll start by talking about a book that I've taught in our sequence, The Scarlet Letter. I think that The Scarlet Letter is great on a few levels. I think, one, Hawthorne is a genius as a writer. I think he is deeply humorous in the way that he uses language. The actual sentences themselves are dripping with irony and sarcasm, and they're clever, and every sentence makes me want to read the next sentence. I've always loved Hawthorne's actual writing ability, and I think that's a part of his significance. I think that's one. I think second, he is a genius of symbolism, and it's a little on the nose in The Scarlet Letter, but he is writing from a time period removed from Puritan culture, commenting on it in ways that subvert it and show its importance for American culture. And so there's a level of universality to his thinking about the ideas of his time and place. And then it's very particular, and then it's very New England, but it's universal, and then it comments on the human condition of guilt and redemption. That's the reason our students read Scarlet Letter, is because they need to experience that so they go on to read other great American literature. Your turn.
You're both looking at me.
Well, I'm trying to think of a particular book in our, every time trying to think of a particular book in our offerings, I can't think of one in particular. I mean, I'll just take one at random. The Moffats.
Yeah.
There's something about children's literature, which there's a sort of magic that I'd call it the magic of the ordinary, where for some reason the words you use almost act like an incantation to bring out of this ordinary experience something really magical and meaningful. And there's very few writers who can do that well. I think E.B. White is able to do this really well. But Eleanor Estes, who wrote The Moffats, she does this really well. There's just something magical about these ordinary stories, about these ordinary children living in an ordinary neighborhood in an ordinary time. I'll throw that in there too. That just evokes something. It's hard to explain, but you know it if you've read it. You know it if you've seen it. And so I'll just throw that one out. And again, we have Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, and the same thing. There's writers like that who you can read the first paragraph and you know you're in the hands of a master. And those are two of them, I think.
Well, I was going to say Charlotte's Web.
Okay.
But I won't. I will switch to Anne of Green Gables. And I think, of course, it's got all the same amazing themes that Charlotte's Web and the Moffats have. It's a community. It's, people trying to live together, doing their best. It's, Marilla who appears to, this is such a good lesson for children, who appears to be so rough and mean, but, as adults, we recognize Marilla's personality, but children don't. They have to learn that roughness covers up concern and sensitivity. And, it's just the characters are just so good. It's sad, but it also has so much redemption, and giving up. I mean, to have a book where, you want when you're 12, you want everything to have a perfect ending.
Right.
And it doesn't. She has to give up her college plans to come home and take care of Marilla. And it's just beautiful. And it is universal because we haven't talked about gender. Anne of Green Gables appears to be a book for girls, but it's not. It's a book for everybody. Little House in the Big Woods is a book for everybody. Farmer Boy is a book for girls. That has to be part of it too.
Absolutely.
Did Martin steal your book too?
No, he didn't. And it's interesting because both of you, so Martin talking about the ordinary, and even in Anne of Green Gables, right? It's friendship, it's community, it's family.
Yes.
And I was thinking of Treasure Island. And the reason, and as I was kind of thinking about it, I thought for one, he's a great storyteller. It pulls you in and you just want to know what's going to happen next.
Great characters,
but also fairly far removed from most people's experience. Right. When was the last time you had pirates stay at your house and you ended up on a
It's been weeks.
But I think one thing it really makes you do is go, what would I do in this situation? Right. Because you've got Jim and he's doing his best to make upright decisions, but save his own life. Right. And, so, okay, what would you do? And I think a great book is going to cause a question to arise that you have to ponder.
That's great. Those are all great books.
But, we could talk like this about every single book in our curriculum.
I was going to go for Anna Karenina, but I felt like that was just easy.
That's low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit, yeah.
You're right, because we filled our curriculum with great books. Thanks for definitively deciding with me at this table during this discussion what a great book is. Thank you. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Classical Etc. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider liking this video. If you want to join the conversation, then you can comment below, and if you want to stay connected, please subscribe to our channel. I hope you enjoyed this show, and we'll see you next time.